Okay, so you should now be able to see my screen. So as Sandra mentioned, we're going to use the category of green consumerism around beauty to demonstrate the data sources we cover, how we use AI to segment the data, how we can discover insights through our discovery modules within the domains of unmet needs, user innovation, and market trends. In addition to how we analyze and report on these trends, all whilst giving you a feel for the user experience and how our clients turn these findings into actions. So the first thing you see when you log into the dashboard is the Listen tab. And as Alan mentioned, we have access to huge amounts of data. Majority of that data traditionally is unstructured. So this is where we're taking all of that data and structuring it within your dashboard. Now, it's important that we don't assume that all data sets are relevant for every project and that we understand the role that each data source plays in our research. And this is really where we can set the foundations of our data set. On this particular project, the three sources of data we deem to be most effective are behavioral data, social data, and survey data. And I'll explain the role each source plays shortly. However, for kind of different business questions, you do have the ability to add other formats of data from CRM to website visits and so on. What you can do within the Listen tab is go from a macro view to a more micro view. So what I mean by that is we can very quickly focus on specific data sources. For example, if I just wanted to, focus in on consumer review data, then I have that capability. I can then kind of go straight in there and look at the specific websites within that. In addition, what we're also able to do is apply analytical lenses in the form of classifiers to any data set. Now, this could be a framework looking at user innovation, or it can even be a community of people that we know are interested in sustainable products. As you can see here, we've already applied an algorithm for innovation hacks. Now, as discussed, based on this specific brief, we're using the Ipsos Innovation Spaces framework, and Innovation Spaces was developed with consumer feedback in mind, specifically to provide a solution to client feedback. And brands, of course, want to use new and disruptive ideas needed for growth. However, most struggle to be truly creative and think outside the box. Historically, brands have made decisions based on impulse and opinion, and here we provide a data-driven approach to highlight areas of opportunity that may previously have been invisible to the human eye in the form of our topic modeling. Now, whilst our topic modeling is processing and processing millions of data points, I'm just going to jump into another example focused on unmet needs. So essentially how our topic modeling works, our bottom-up topic modeling uses density-based clustering to automatically identify the most efficient number of clusters without pre-definition. So it's important to note that the topic modeling will cluster conversations based on the density, as Sandra mentioned, the similarity of conversations, then cluster them into an overarching theme. This is a huge advantage of Synthesios versus other tools in the market who traditionally focus on a keyword. So first of all, when it comes to unmet needs, you'll see here the tools automatically identify these clusters. This is 100% AI generated. When we come to explore these clusters, what we'll actually be able to see is that there's a lot of conversations emerging around problematic refills. We can also see there's clusters around products being in a poor condition. So as you can see here, consumers are kind of airing their concerns around the fact they're excited about the fact that they've, shifted to a more sustainable product, but really the product hasn't quite met expectations and has been kind of frequently damaged and not necessarily fit for purpose once they've received the products. So then what we want to do, now that we've kind of identified unmet needs around product quality, I'm going to quickly jump back to the previous topic modeling study in which we're looking at user innovation. Again, as you'll see here, the most significant clusters tend to be focused on DIY. So we can see here that consumers are actually making their own kind of perfume scents at home, as well as their own deodorant. Again, we can click through to this and we'll see the cluster in more granularity. So just for reference, each circle you see on the screen represents a conversation. The size of the circle represents the number of interactions on that mention or conversation, and the distance between each circle represents the semantic similarity. So essentially what we've done through these two topic modeling studies is very quickly leveraged our AI to automatically identify unmet needs when it comes to product quality, but then also from a user innovation perspective, being able to understand that consumers are now in a scenario where they feel like it's perhaps more effective to create their own solutions at home. So now what I'm going to do is jump into the reports section of the platform. Before I do that, it's also worth mentioning that whenever a new cluster is identified within the platform, you also have the capability to then track that cluster. Clicking here, it then allows us to add that cluster as either a topic, subtopic, or classifier within the data set. And the tool will then automatically generate a query for you for ongoing tracking. So now what we're going to focus on is, again, unmet needs, focusing on the category of sustainable packaging. As you can see here, sustainable packaging is a topic, probably won't come as a surprise, is generating huge volumes of conversation, particularly positive volumes of conversation, mainly from consumers expressing the desire to shift towards a more sustainable way of living. We can see that interactions are up 35% versus the previous time frame, and the overall net sentiment is a score of 88.9. So now what we want to do is we want to understand, are there any specific ingredients or specific materials that consumers are using within their DIY user innovation hacks? Or are there kind of materials that are emerging organically that we should be aware of should we want to shift towards a more sustainable solution for our packaging and perhaps the option of refillables? So this visualization here is a visualization that's inspired by our existing trend radar framework. Really, the purpose of this life cycle chart is really so we can understand the growth trajectory of emerging entities. In this scenario, we're looking at materials. As you'll see here, we've split this chart across 6 key areas: from development, introduction, growth, maturity, saturation, decline. Really, the reason for that is we really don't want to rely on volume as a benchmark when it comes to identifying trends. A really good example of that is Coca-Cola. Coca-Cola will always generate huge volumes, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they're trending. This also allows us to understand when entities are, in their initial development stages versus when they're perhaps more mature or perhaps even stagnant. As you can see here, again, the tool has automatically surfaced and identified these emerging materials. Again, there's been no human input into this at any stage. In addition to that, we've also kind of spread that out a little bit more, where we've kind of cast the net a little bit wider. Here's where the tool will identify the emerging entities, and then what we have the ability to do is to then track those entities moving forward. For example, you can see within the growth area that Bambuzi is an entity that's emerging. We can then click through to that and investigate that in more detail, or alternatively, we can actually add that to the chart above based on the entities that we want to track moving forward. So far we've identified that there's been a need for kind of a stronger solution when it comes to refillables and sustainable packaging. We've also identified that from a user innovation perspective, consumers are now actually becoming more creative and creating solutions at home when it comes to different products. In addition to that, we've also identified that there's a emerging growing need or growing entity or potential innovation opportunity in bamboo. So now what we want to do is we want to dig into that trend in more detail. So now what we're doing is we're analyzing bamboo and understanding the overall sentiment and trend of bamboo as a potential solution for sustainable packaging. As you can see here from the top of the screen, again, the volume that we see around bamboo is really quite significant. It's grown over 383% versus the previous time frame. Our engagement rate is also up around 300%, and the net sentiment's actually really high. But what are the kind of barriers to entry? We've heard from a lot of brands. We know that a lot of organizations are interested in kind of shifting towards a more sustainable solution. However, you know, the barriers to adoption have perhaps been a little bit stronger than we anticipated. So here, using our correlation map, we can actually see when people are speaking about bamboo, when it comes to refillables, what are the categories in which they most frequently talk about? Very heavily associated with skincare, but also fragrance and to a degree makeup. But also what we want to do is we also want to understand, you know, what are the barriers? As you can see here, what we're also able to do is analyze the different stages of the consumer journey, from consideration to purchase to post-purchase. And rather interestingly, what you'll see here is that the correlation of conversations around kind of the consumer journey and bamboo-based products is really heavily dominated by purchase and evolution. We can then dig deeper into that to understand kind of more context on that. And ultimately, what we found from our research is that consumers, again, they're really quite keen to you know, move towards a more sustainable way of living, however, not at the expense of product quality. And that's why we're seeing a lot of evolution around these conversations. Then when we kind of dig deeper into bamboo specific conversations to understand what are the key conversations that consumers are leading with, you can see here that rather interestingly, when it comes to bamboo, the most significant kind of theme of conversation is actually around the strength of bamboo packaging as a product. You'll see here that there's a lot of conversations around how strong it is. And again, all of this conversation is all generated by our text analytics, one of our AI modules. We can also then leverage additional data sources in consumer review data. One thing to note is that when we actually see conversations around bamboo packaging from review sites, the scores that we see are actually very, very strong. So the average review score across skincare, makeup, and fragrance are all around about 4.5 and above. There's just not enough products out there. You'll also see when we apply emotion to the category of refillables specific to bamboo, that it's heavily dominated by joy. So we can then, of course, you know, allow us to understand that, of course, there's definitely an appetite for more sustainable solutions, as well as then actually digging deeper into the user-generated content to see who's driving conversations in this particular category. Now, as I mentioned, it's important that we don't just look at data in silos, and what we want to be able to do is to, you know, really effectively use specific data sources within our research that add more value based on specific business questions. So social data is really valuable for identifying those very early signals. Then what we want to do is we want to use survey data to validate, to actually understand and speak to potential consumers and understand, is there an appetite for more sustainable products? Within this survey question, so this is actually leveraging Ipsos Digital. So Ipsos Digital is you know, part of one of the largest global panel networks in the world, consisting of over 1.8 million people. And essentially, Ipsos Digital will enable you to build and conduct surveys in a matter of minutes and will deliver results from respondents within around about 24 to 48 hours, depending on the number of respondents in a survey. And using social and survey gives us a really clear understanding of if this product is something we can invest in and go to market with. So as you can see here, we asked the question, when purchasing a new product, how important is it that the brand reflects your values? And it's probably no surprise to you that the majority of respondents said it is in fact extremely important that brands reflect their values through the lens or the purpose of sustainability. We also asked how interested would you be in purchasing products made with bamboo packaging. And as you can see here, out of a score between 1 and 7, the majority of people that responded yes were all kind of 5, or majority of which were 5 and above. And then finally, we also wanted to kind of understand, you know, who's our target demographic, you know, who are our potential consumers. And rather interestingly, we actually identified that consumers from the ages of 30 to 65 were definitely a lot more enthusiastic when it comes to purchasing bamboo-based products. So we know we have a large segment of consumers between the ages of 30 and 65 that have shown a strong interest in purchasing bamboo-based products. So survey answers the question of the who and the intent, social the opportunity. The most effective data set for understanding the where and the interests of a particular audience is behavioral data. So now what I'm going to do is just very quickly jump into our behavioral segment. So the average person online posts around once per day, and the remainder of time they spend on the internet is spent exploring and clicking through various different websites. All of that unprompted, unsupervised behavior is tracked, and this enables us to not only understand the demographic makeup of our audience in great detail, but also will allow us to understand their interests, where they spend their time online, as well as their hobbies and activities. So when we do want to go to market with a particular innovation, we have a very clear and detailed understanding of who our consumer is and what their interests are. So as you can see here, within a study, we always have a target audience and a reference audience. The reason we do that is so we can understand the statistical relevance of a particular interest. That's also why we apply our affinity score to the data. An example would be if our target audience, let's say 50% of our target audience is interested in yoga, but only 20% of our reference audience is interested in yoga, we're heavily over-indexing on that specific interests. So as you can see here, when it comes to brands, this particular audience has a very strong affiliation with Amazon, Google, and seem to be very affiliated with online websites. We can then, of course, drill down to understand specifics, and we can apply lenses over this. So if we just wanted to look at luxury brands or sustainable brands, we have that capability. We can then also focus in on hobbies and activities. So again, if it comes to creating content or targeting specific niche audiences, we can get a very clear understanding of what their interests are from kind of the perspective of their hobbies and activities and so on. So very interested in kind of political and social issues, interior design, cooking, and so on. We can then also understand the media that they consume. And again, this is all based on their behaviors and the time that they spend online. This essentially tells us that the way in which our audience enjoys consuming information is in the form of newspapers, television, Facebook, magazines, blogs, and forums, in addition to then also understanding specific interests around arts and entertainment, really so we can get a very holistic and very detailed understanding of our consumers. Now, this is a bespoke or a default template that we apply to the dashboard. However, we can provide much more granularity and much more specific segments depending on the specific business question. We can also drill down into that audience to understand more about the gender distribution. We can see there that the majority being female, as well as the age distribution when it comes to targeting. So now that's a very, very quick overview of how we would answer the question that we have around kind of potential innovation opportunities.